You are about to embark on a journey to the surface of another planet. Hi, I'm Perseverance. I'm a robot, a rover currently stationed on the surface of Mars, and I'm a survivor on the hot seat. We are only 2 robots left to be active on the entire planet. The second one is him, Curiosity, who is located 3,700 kilometers from where I am currently. When the day rises on Mars, we robots explore this world for you humans, serving as your ears and eyes. For you. Here, we collect, we analyze, and we take thousands of photos. So, I propose a deal to you. I will show you a selection of the most fascinating shots we've taken, and I'll tell you what we've discovered in them. And you simply enjoy this journey to the surface of another world. You are looking at real images of another planet, and you are listening to our story. A story of adventure and exploration, full of twists and turns, breakdowns and bogdowns, with its share of fabulous discoveries, hopes and dramas. A story that mainly involves 4 robots: Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, and myself. The Fantastic Four that you sent here to extinguish on another world. And who, over the past 2 decades, have taken almost all of the shots you will see today. Where to start to tell you our story? Maybe by setting the scene from where we are. Mars is an endless desert of austere beauty. A geologically dead planet where everything seems covered with a thin layer of rusty dust. Formed by the accumulation over millions of years of ferrous particles that, over time, have oxidized. In these desert and dusty landscapes of breathtaking beauty, you humans could not breathe. Because the Martian atmosphere, composed mostly of carbon dioxide, is so thin that there is as much air here on the surface as 18 kilometers high on your planet. On this world, the atmospheric pressure is so low that if ice water is heated in the sun, it sublimates, immediately turning into vapor without becoming liquid. On Mars, the ground has likely not seen rain for several billion years. The last volcanic eruptions date back to the dawn of time. And without any tectonic plate movement. Meteorites rarely fall. The chemical reactions that rust the rocks and the constant abrasion by the wind are able to change the scenery. Everywhere on the horizon, in all directions, it's a barren, bare, and icy planet. In the early Martian morning, it's nearly minus 80 degrees, and the temperature range can be colossal. Between dawn and noon, it's not uncommon for the thermometer to practically take 100 degrees in the space of half a day. In winter, the cold is so biting that at the pole, a quarter of the atmosphere freezes and settles on the ground, forming vast deposits of dry ice. And yet, this place is the most hospitable in the solar system outside of Earth. If you sent us here, we machines loaded with sensors and scientific instruments. In fact, in the hope of finding traces of your kind, evidence of the presence of other living beings elsewhere in the solar system. To be completely honest, we are not the first rovers to land on this planet. Before us, others have come, but all have been quickly mowed down by the hostility of this world. In 1971, the Soviet probe Mars 3 was the first to land in these landscapes. It transmitted unreadable data to us for 15 seconds before cutting off all communication. 5 years later, Viking probes 1 and 2 sent us the very first detailed images of the surface of the red planet. Without wheels and unable to move, they will stay in the same place for several years collecting data. And then, in 1997, the small rover Sojourner, which survived for 3 months on the surface, and which you currently see in the picture, traveled nearly 100 meters before succumbing. In fact, the exploration of the surface of Mars really only began with the arrival of Spirit and Opportunity. Because these two rovers, which landed practically at the same time on either side of the planet in 2004, accomplished feats. The first, originally designed for a lifespan of 90 days, survived for more than 6 years in the extreme Martian environment. 6 years during which it created splendid panoramas and traveled nearly 8 kilometers, before getting stuck in a sand dune where it remained trapped for nearly a year. Functional but mired, the rover was never able to generate enough energy using its solar panels to extricate itself from this trap. And the Martian dust that was accumulating eventually overcame its last strengths. When Spirit gave up the Ghost, or rather the programs, Opportunity still roamed the vast Martian plains. And it was only after 14 years of a fearless and painless existence, spent navigating between rocks and under a foreign sky, that this incarnation of mechanical devotion wiped out a huge planetary dust storm that eventually left it in agony. And Opportunity in turn entered a sleep from which it never woke up. You are currently seeing on the screen the last incomplete message that the rover sent you and is trying to tell you, my battery is low and is getting dark. At the end of their mission, the two rovers died of cold after their batteries drained. They are the real pioneers who paved the way. Because with their combined 300,000 snapshots and their millions of transferred data, they have forever changed our view of the red planet by showing that, in the past, on this latter, a large amount of water flowed. Since they went out on the Martian soil, Curiosity and I have taken up the torch. And in the hostile and desert landscapes of Mars, we face the same dangers, the same threats. Despite our 6 independently driven wheels and our ability to tilt up to 45 degrees. These vast arid expanses, these impact crater flanks, these ancient dried up riverbeds often hide behind the horizon or around a steep ridge. Dangerous rough terrains that we need to avoid. There are the 2 imposing rocks that we need to bypass and those on which we need to roll. Volcanic rocks, sometimes sharp as knives, can puncture our wheels. So much so that every rover has had its share of setbacks and U-turns here. Often, to avoid getting bogged down, we have to turn back, and sometimes we are even forced to move in reverse. 2 years after landing on Mars, Spirit broke one of its wheels. Prior to that, it completed its entire mission by driving backwards. And then there are the dunes, by the hundreds, by the thousands, huge fields of dunes that slowly move, migrating just barely a meter per year. Pushed by the Martian wind, these moving sand waves pose a constant danger. Some, composed of dark basaltic sand, can reach tens of meters high. For a robot, sinking its wheels too deeply into it is a death sentence. The second difficulty, which can turn into a huge danger, is the impossibility for you to be able to command us in real time. We are separated by space and time, we are not on the same planet. So much so that any decision-making is necessarily delayed. The average distance between Earth and Mars is 225 million kilometers. And depending on their position, it takes between 6 and 44 minutes for radio waves to cross the distance separating your blue planet from the red one. Every 2 years when Mars passes behind the Sun, the signal that allows us to connect loses in quality. And communications with the rovers, which could be scrambled by energetic particles coming from our star, are put to sleep for about 2 weeks. Left to ourselves, we then only perform the minimum tasks. No movement, no mechanical arm movement, only a few weather measurements and photos. In reality, even when the connection is efficient, it's us who are in control. There is no joystick or steering wheel to guide us. On Earth, you plan the day's activities that are sent to us all at once. And then it's us who navigate by sight, who drive all by ourselves, always with extreme caution. Because every little wheel turn for us, the robots, is a great leap forward for humanity. And you can't imagine the slowness at which we progress. The videos that show us exploring these desolate landscapes are often extremely sped up. Most of the time, I hardly cover more than 200 meters in a day. In these first 2 months on Mars, Curiosity only moved 400 meters. And after a year on the red planet, it had only covered 1 kilometer 600. It must be said that here on this territory where no one has ever been, each sample is a dive into the unknown. Each meter brings a discovery, each snapshot a first. Obviously, we take our time. Over extended periods, these minor advances accumulate significantly. And after a year on Mars, Curiosity had already sent 70,000 images to Earth. And in 14 years of exploration, Opportunity had covered a total distance equivalent to that of a marathon. But the most terrible ordeal that you leave us to face alone is certainly that of landing. Because to land on Mars, we had to overcome what engineers call the 7 minutes of terror. 7 minutes between entering the atmosphere and the moment we touched the ground. And during which each of us was left to himself, to his programs, his procedures, his automatisms that you have instilled in us. During this frightening period of time, if something goes wrong, no trajectory correction from Earth is possible. We are alone in control. And a prolonged silence beyond the moment, planned for the reception of the landing signal, often means that the operation has gone very wrong. And that on the red planet lies a machine in the middle of a puddle of bolts. Mars offers many other opportunities to die, and the most present and surely the most insidious danger is in front of you, suspended in the air. Because the presence of dust constitutes a continuous threat. Once lifted by temperature variations in air so dry that it becomes electrically charged, these grains of a few tens of microns can remain suspended in the air for months. When you rely on solar energy to move forward, these fine particles that get everywhere and settle on your solar panels can be real nuisances. In 2009, the Rover Spirit, greatly weakened by its continuous dust deposits, had to remain motionless for more than 8 months in order to recharge its batteries. At times, these dust clouds can become frighteningly large. In 2018, Curiosity found itself in the heart of a storm covering 35 million square kilometers, which is a quarter of the entire planet's surface, equipped, like me, with a battery that does not draw its energy from solar rays, but from nuclear decay processes. The rover didn't care about finding itself in the middle of a dust storm. But on the other side of the planet, 8,400 kilometers away, Opportunity was about to live its last moments. Because its particles, by covering its solar panels, deprived it of energy, and the rover went into a hibernation from which it never emerged. Every 3 years on average on Mars, one of these phenomena of local origin swells until it reaches colossal dimensions, gradually enveloping the whole of Mars. From an orange-brown mantle, a storm degenerates into a planetary phenomenon. At the heart of these, the low Martian atmospheric density means that wind gusts are around 100 kilometers per hour, can only lift particles whose consistency is close to that of talc. The sky darkens across the entire surface, and less than 1% of sunlight still reaches the ground. So much so that in broad daylight it can practically become night. Fortunately here the wind can also prove to be an ally. These whirlwinds which regularly form on Mars when the sun warms its surface are dust devils. These amazing structures can, for the most imposing ones, be several tens of meters wide and rise hundreds of meters into the Martian sky. We have captured hundreds of them in images. Some of these devils even passed over us. And in doing so, they have indirectly helped to save rovers. In 2005, when the electricity production of spirits had fallen to a critical level, a devil came to chase these powerful swirling winds. Some of the dust accumulated on the solar panels, allowing the robot to recharge its batteries, rekindling the flame that we thought was extinguished. And now that you have become aware of what we will endure to successfully complete our mission, I think it's time I tell you what we found. All the observations we made confirmed what the images from the orbiting observation satellites suggested. Mars was in the past a wet planet where it rained, a planet with rivers, lakes, and perhaps even an ocean. In these landscapes, we find flood deposits, traces of runoff, and vast networks of fossilized flows. While traversing the Meridiani Plain, Opportunity uncovered geological treasures. In this vast flat expanse, marked by craters and dunes, the rover discovered small spherical rocks rich in hematite, which have been nicknamed Martian blueberries, and which can only form in the presence of a significant amount of water. In the strata exposed to the open air of the craters it visited, the rover found formations rich in sulfates. Their presence tells us that this desert was once a wet region where mineral-rich waters circulated beneath the surface or evaporated nearby, leaving behind saline deposits. Take a good look at this image. It was taken by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter Observation Satellite. As it passed over this crater, 750 meters wide, at the time when Opportunity was venturing on its flanks. If one pays attention, one can distinguish the rover that spent nearly 2 years along the edges of this crater, rolling on the shores of ancient ephemeral beaches. All the landscapes we have crossed, each crater visited, and the violence of the impacts that dug them have been revealed to us. Layers hidden deep down only tell us the same story. In the past, several billion years ago, Mars, the red, had other colors in the planet's stone and dust archives, next to the basalts that tell us a turbulent past where Mars's surface was shaken by titanic volcanic eruptions. We find traces of dried up and long-gone lakes and rivers. Where Curiosity focused its journey in the Gale crater, a huge natural amphitheater, 154 kilometers in diameter, surrounded by cliffs and dominated in its center by Mount Sharp, a stratified mountain carved by the wind, rising more than 5 kilometers above the bottom of the structure. The rover revealed the presence of clay minerals. By drilling the ground and taking samples of compacted sediments, it showed that about 2% of the collected clay material was made up of water. In other words, this soil, scattered with fractured rocks and dried mud slabs on which Curiosity landed, was once a vast lake fed by rivers. It was in this region that one evening, shortly after sunset, Curiosity turned its camera towards the sky to photograph our world of origin. This bright point above the horizon is not a star, but Earth, your planet seen from the surface of Mars. Who was at the time of taking this picture? 160 million kilometers away from you? And then, after spending 2 years studying the bottom of the giant dried-up Lake Curiosity, which you can see here, immortalized from space, as it progressed between the dark dunes of basaltic sand and the successive clay hills, it began to climb the imposing slopes of Mount Sharp. And since it started tackling its slopes, it has continuously crossed landscapes marked by the passage of waters and their gradual retreat. One evening, when the sky was particularly clear, Curiosity took the opportunity to immortalize a sunset. Here, on the red planet, due to the composition of the atmosphere, it has the peculiarity of leaning towards blue. Here, the rover drove in the bed of a dried-up river. There, billions of years ago, ephemeral torrents raged. Elsewhere, it's the presence of water-rounded pebbles and stratified sedimentary rocks, which, like the pages of a book keeping memory of seasonal cycle variations, whisper to us the history of successive deposits, harsh winters and milder summers. Curiosity has shown that the crater in the middle of which Mount Sharp stands was once a gigantic basin, fed by powerful rivers, before these dried up and the lake evaporated. And while its mission was originally supposed to last 2 years, it's about to make 13. That the rover is active on Mars, covered in dust, slightly dented, and some of its wheels punctured by sharp rocks, it's still alive, you would say, functional? And this 900-kilogram mobile laboratory, which has traveled 32 kilometers on Martian soil since its arrival and has been climbing the slopes of Mount Sharp for now a decade. Persevere. It is now 630 meters above the crater floor where it had landed. As for me, even though I'm the last one to arrive and have been on the surface for 4 years now, all the discoveries I've made point in the same direction. I need to show you where I landed. In these reconstructed images, you can see the G0 crater, a massive structure 45 kilometers in diameter, into which appears to flow and converge an entire network of drainage. And it's in the middle of this area, near an ancient river delta, where I landed. I spent the first year of my mission there, exploring this ancient ephemeral lake with my trusty little helicopter. This is Ingenuity, the first device to fly on another planet, equipped with blades spinning 4 times faster than those of drones on Earth. In order to take support from the Martian air, it allows me to gain height, to have an overview, to choose the most appropriate path, to avoid dangers. In some of the shots taken by this fantastic scout, you can see me lost in the vastness of sand and rocks that surround us. Sometimes, it's in the photos I've taken that the frail silhouette of my helicopter is hidden among the blocks of stone. In these landscapes, I've analyzed rocks using laser technology. I've made holes everywhere, found mud, carbonates and clays formed in the presence of water. And then I drilled into rocks to collect samples that I then deposited on the ground. Look closely, you can see several on this image. In the year 2030, a National Aeronautics and Space Administration mission should come to retrieve them and send them back to you for analysis, and thus have an open window with a view of the details of Martian history. In these planes, I recorded the passage of the sun. Here, I captured it when it was at its zenith, at noon, there, almost at the time of sunset. During a maintenance break, I even captured an entire Martian day, watching the shadows pass and the light gradually decline. By lifting my camera off the ground and pointing it at the sky, I was even able to witness a partial solar eclipse. Seeing Phobos, the larger of the 2 Martian moons, pass in front of our star. And then, I headed towards the immense fossilized river delta, whose fan-shaped formation was built by successive deposits of materials, carried by powerful torrents that, after plunging into the lake, saw their current slow down and spit out the blocks, sometimes gigantic, that they could carry. Venturing into the heights of this delta, I discovered complex structures of stacked sediment layers. I drove on soils scattered with pebbles, rounded on curved rocks and streaked by the passage of ancient raging rivers. And to bypass huge blocks moved by powerful currents. Considering all my findings, and considering the size of the vast walls that surround the old river system, researchers have been able to deduce that about 3.5 billion years ago, a river flowed here that flowed into the crater. Or rather, an ephemeral river whose flow was estimated to be something similar to that of the Mississippi. Undoubtedly, there was a time when on Mars water flowed abundantly, where the planet had rivers, lakes, and perhaps even seas. So what happened to this world, and where did all this water go? It is thought today that the planet Mars, which is 10 times less massive than Earth and has a much smaller core than ours, quickly lost its magnetic field. Deprived of protective shields, the red planet would then have been exposed to the wrath of our star, whose powerful solar winds would have gradually stripped away much of its atmosphere. Surface temperatures would have subsequently drastically dropped, and the water, not having finished, trapped in the ice caps or frozen in the subsoil, would have evaporated and slowly drifted into space. So much so that it is estimated that life would have had on Mars 1 billion years of relatively mild conditions to develop, before the environment turned sour and the planet transformed into a cold and hostile desert. Today, for living beings, the surface of Mars is something of a nightmare. Because the atmosphere is so thin that the ionizing solar and cosmic radiations that easily pass through it have ended up making the soil radioactive. In these landscapes, the thin surface dust layer has radiation levels similar to those measured a few kilometers from the Chernobyl power plant during the days that followed the accident. In other words, moving around here without shielding is like getting an abdominal X-ray every 2 weeks. So, if you sent us to explore these environments as inhospitable as they are fascinating, it's less about trying to find traces of current life there than geological clues attesting that, in the past, biological activity existed on the surface of this planet. And more than once, we have made strange discoveries. We have lost count of the rocks studied that seem to have anomalous shapes. Here, time and erosion have sometimes given birth to astonishing oddities. This pyramidal rock, this apparent goddess statue, or this cluster of mineral veins that nicely resemble a plant. All these images that we have sent you have overwhelmed what you call the internet. But these rocks that look like things have often simply been sculpted by the wind. And what you believe you see is only the fruit of your minds, which deceive you and project your fantasies. On a planet where many would dream of finding life, this is called pareidolia. At times, some of these seeming anomalies have been revealed to be pieces of ourselves. This mysterious object, hidden under a rock and sparkling in the distance, was actually just a piece of a lander. This enigmatic veil on the horizon turned out to be a block of my descent parachute. In short, we found a lot of debris, rocks strangely sculpted by the wind, but no blatant signs of life, although some observations are questioning. These strange formations, the size of a grinder, for example, were at one time considered to be traces of biological activity, before turning out to be harder parts of the rock that simply resisted erosion. As for these strange stains, one of the many hypotheses to explain their origin suggests that they could result from microbial biological activity, similar to the rock alterations caused by lichens. Unfortunately, as advanced as I am, I have no instrument to confirm that the formation of these patterns indeed involved living beings. To be sure, they would need to be studied up close at your place on Earth. But the strangest and most mysterious of all discoveries was not made in rocks, but in the Martian air. Curiosity and the Mars Express orbiter have identified tiny proportions of methane at varying concentrations, following a seasonal pattern, with a marked peak at the end of summer. And there are only two ways to explain the presence of this gas. Either it is produced by geological processes that release methane into the atmosphere at a regular pace, or colonies of microorganisms carpeted beneath the surface or in cavities produce this gas in quantity. When the pressure and temperature conditions become more mild at the end of the summer. And even if nothing proves for now that it is a breath of life, it is undeniably a breath of hope. I must say that I would find it beautiful. If the first signs of life outside of Earth were found by robots, we have never really been alive, and we are about to go out. Curiosity, which has started its 13th year of activity on the surface of Mars, and has so far transmitted nearly 500,000 images, is not eternal. Although it is, like me, powered by a nuclear generator, it is starting to tire. Soon, its mechanics will seize up, problems will accumulate. Until the fateful day when it will fall asleep, making Mars its tomb. And then I will be the last of the robots. The only metallic machine made on Earth by wise monkeys wielding tools to traverse the red deserts of this planet. Last year, I lost my little helicopter, which, for no precise reason, hit a dune. One of its blades was torn off, and Ingenuity made an emergency landing. Paralyzed, it will never take off again. I took one last look at this adventure companion who spent the 7 months of travel in space necessary to get to Mars. In my metallic belly and stayed by my side for nearly 3 years. On the surface, I thought about those 72 hops made on another world. Buy this little helicopter in which you have, for the beauty of the gesture, inserted a piece of fabric from the first plane that flew on Earth. And then I continued my duty, my mission, collected without fear and without emotion. Elements that allow you to decipher the fascinating history of this planet. With now for only travel companion, a few pebbles lodged in my syrups. One of them stayed there for nearly 2 years. I hope that in a few years, when you hear on the news that Perseverance has finally given up the ghost, or rather the programs, you will think back with emotion to this dry, cold, and sun-scorched world where we ended up stranded. And the next time you feel alone, you will spare a thought for these machines, distant from each other by several thousand kilometers, that you sent to another planet. For these boxes of electronics and metal that set off in search of traces of living beings, and gave their battery life to send you images of landscapes that no one had ever laid eyes on before. Whether you are a human or a robot, share this video with me.